This tutorial is going over how to use a grid. In this video, I'm going to use this eye, and I'm going to draw it a little bit larger on this paper. Whenever I measure these squares, they're a little bit less than an inch, but I'm going to draw inch squares on here. So I'm going to first label my sections. I'm going to zoom in on this for you. So I'm going to have 8 columns. And 5 rows. And then my paper should just fit that. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to take my ruler. Using the inch side, I'm going to measure out. Now I'm trying to make sure my ruler is straight on my paper. I'm going to measure out an 8-inch line on the top of my paper. I'm going to move this out of the way for a minute. Now on this side, I need to do a 5-inch line. So I need to make sure my ruler is straight. And I do that by, checking the side of my paper. I'm going to do the same thing over here. And then I'm going to connect these. Hopefully this is about 8 inches. That's a little bit off, so somewhere my drawing wasn't completely accurate, but for a practice I think this is fine. So next I'm going to mark every inch. I'm going to do the same thing up here. So now I can go ahead and connect these lines. Now this is a grid that I don't want it to be permanent, so I'm not going to press really hard. Now I'm probably pressing a little bit harder for this recording so y'all can see what I'm doing. But if I were doing this for a drawing that I really wanted to look nice, I wouldn't be pressing very hard. Alright, so I've fixed that little error I had in measurement here. Alright, so I have 8 columns, and I can even label those. Now I need to make my rows. So I'm going to do the same thing I did. I'm going to mark every inch. And I'm going to do that on both sides of my rectangle here. So now I can connect my ruler, connect those dots with my ruler, and draw some lines here. So now I have 5 rows. So the same amount of rows and columns are on my paper here. Okay. So my next step is to start drawing. Now some things that help me whenever I do this. If I look at my picture, if there are some areas that are maybe a little bit not as defined as I would like them to be, I can go in and I can make them more defined. So for example, this line right here is very, very slight in the picture. So if I make that a little bit darker, now I can see it. I can even draw this line a little bit darker, and that'll help me when I start transferring this over to the other paper. Okay, so anytime there's a part that you can't see real well, make it a little bit more definitive and draw it a little bit better on top of the actual picture. Okay, so the first thing that I start with, typically I'll start with the outline of an object and get that placed. Okay, so that's what we're going to start with here. So I'm first going to look at this corner. Where does this corner lie? All right, so if this is the corner, Where is that? This is in C3. So I need to find C3 on my picture. All right, C3. So this is the box that I'm looking for. Now I need to really look to see where that is. How far over does it come into that box? Well, this is about my halfway mark here, so it comes almost halfway, and then I could find my halfway mark. It's not, it's not very close to that halfway mark. It's really just right off the edge. So I can find that on here. So here's my halfway mark. And if that's my halfway mark, that might be where the corner of my eye is. All right, so I can look and see what I'm trying to draw and try to mimic that. Now I know where it's placed, so I can try to mimic that in my square. Now I need to kind of figure out where this intersects. All right, it's just slightly above the halfway point. So if my halfway point's here, it's going to maybe come just slightly above there. All right, so now I have the corner of my eye. Now I know I have other things that I need to draw in this box, but really I'm going to ignore those right now, and I'm going to try to focus more on getting the outline, the shape of my eye first. All right, I'm going to move on to this. So this is really just coming in on the corner, but I need to figure out how far down is coming. So if that's like my halfway point, it's not quite to my halfway point. So if I find my halfway point here, it's probably going to come right about there. Okay, so again, I'm trying to make sure all the exact same shapes that are happening here are happening here and in the right way. All right, so my next intersection is right here. So there's my halfway point. So it's a little bit below my halfway point. So I'm going to find my halfway points here. Just slightly below. All right, so I'm starting to get the bottom curve of my eye. Now I can look, this just slightly goes up and hits that halfway point. So that's what I'm going to draw here. All right, so this kind of swoops up and flattens out a little bit right there. I'm going to find my halfway point. So it's about halfway between the top and my halfway point. All right. At any point, I can also just kind of look back and compare. Does that line look like this line? All right, so now I'm going to very carefully look at this shape. Looks like it comes a little bit further than halfway, so maybe right about here. I don't think I got that shape quite right. So I'm going to erase it and I'm going to try again. There we go. That looks right about like that. All right, so now I can look more at the top of my eye, and I can start at either end. Since I'm over here, I think I'm just going to continue on. So I'm going to look at where this intersection is, and that's about halfway. Then I can look at my next intersection, which is a little bit fuzzy because of those eyelashes. So it looks like it's almost right where all of those squares meet. So right about there. And I'm just going to look at that curve and try to mimic that curve. All right, so it does keep rounded, so it goes up a little bit and then kind of intersects right at that spot. So just right there. And then that easily connects. Okay, so now I have the correct shape of my eye, and I can continue on. So what would I do next? I'm going to look at probably adding this line on the outside. I've done the inside, so I need to add the outside. And since I have the inside already, the outside is actually fairly easy because it's just a contour. It contours the other line, and then it kind of just disappears right about there. Alright, I'm going to look at adding my iris, and it's the same way I did everything on the outside. So everything that I'm going to add, I'm going to use that same process. Looking at each section very carefully. Okay, so I added some of that detail. Now let's look at this iris. So I'm going to look at where this intersects with the outside of the eye that I already drew. And it looks like it's right about that halfway point, so right about there. And then I'm going to look at where it intersects here. And it's a little bit further over, not halfway. Now I do know this is going to be a perfect circle, but I would say perfect circles are not always easy to draw, right? So I'm constantly referring back to my drawing, making sure that what I'm drawing is exactly the same thing that I see up here, okay? Alright, so I have that iris placed. Now I can focus on the pupil. There's a bunch of details and stuff in here that I could add. Right now I'm just focusing on the main things. I think I should next put in our eyelid line. Like all these things are what I call non-negotiables. Like I have to put these things in and they have to be accurate in order for it to look like the eye I'm drawing. So there are other things that can be improvised a little bit. For instance, all the stuff here doesn't necessarily have to look exactly like this, but all the shape of the eye, all that is so important that it's just non-negotiable. I really have to look at what's on my picture in order to put it here accurately. And if I don't, if something's off, then that means it's not going to look like me or the eye or whatever I'm drawing, if it's me or if it's somebody else. Alright, so I have a pretty good feeling about that, and I feel like everything is really drawn well to the point of where I feel like it is okay for me to erase some of these lines so I can start shading. Okay, so whenever I erase, I'm just going to be very careful not to erase the important stuff. And I can always go back in and redraw if I erase some of the important stuff. But it's important, very important, that you erase before you start shading. Erase that grid. If you have placed everything, then you don't need the grid anymore. Okay? Get rid of it before you start adding the shading. Otherwise, you're going to make your life so complicated trying to get rid of a grid after you shade. It'll be very, very obvious. So if you can tell that there's spots that I have erased, I can go back in and I can lightly redraw those areas to help me whenever I start shading. So before you shade, please make sure you remove your grid. So then now I can start shading. And if I wanted, I could actually draw in some indicators and stuff of of the craziness that's going on in this eye. I can see some eyelashes reflecting. But I can improvise a little bit on that too. All right, so that is how you draw using the grid. I haven't shaded yet, but I plan on doing that.